That's the song which I won't name because it's more fun if you can recognize it just from my playing it. But last time I rolled called the bar chords, and I'm working on the bar chords for that song, but none of those were bar chords. That was the fun part. I'm gonna start. I'll get to the main event eventually uh, by way of books, but I want to start by suggesting that all few people watching listen to at least the beginning of today being May 18th, today's episode of WTF with Mark Maron, in which he reposts the interview that he did in 2015 with Lynn Shelton, accompanied by his thoughts and feelings concerning her death, which are, he says in the thing, maybe given the situation, he shouldn't necessarily, a couple of days after the fact, be talking about it publicly, but he was in a relationship with her. They were quarantined together, and they're both in their mid-50s. She was 54 and died not of the coronavirus or COVID-19, but of a rare blood disorder that they didn't know that she had. And I'd been I listened for the first time, really gave a listen to his 1000th episode, which is from last year, last Thursday, instead of the Thursday episode that day, which I listened to that today, the beginning of it, after listening to today's episode as I was finishing up my chores and dishes. But for the past couple of episodes, they thought maybe she had the coronavirus because she had symptoms that were suggestive, and if you have any symptoms at all right now, your mind goes right there. And so they got her tested. She didn't have it, but she seemed to have something, and they thought it was strep throat, and that was the beginning of today's episode. He talked about that. Or the beginning of last Thursday's episode, which I listened to today after having listened to the episode, him talking about the process of apparently she collapsed and she was taken away, and that was the last time that he saw her. And I've been listening to Mark Maron for a long time, and I think 3 relationships he's had since, and he talks at length about them. At least he did until this most recent one. He said that he was going to keep it more private because the talking about it maybe had contributed to the other ones not working. But then he started talking more openly about it. She was on the podcast not long ago, not her official WTF interview, but just in answer to him saying on the podcast that he's self-quarantining and alone. She said, she heard him say that on the podcast, and she wanted to say, "You're not alone. I'm here too." And anyway, maybe he's right that most people wouldn't speak publicly and at the length that he does about feelings of a loved one's death so soon, but it is what he does. He opens his life to his listeners, to his stand-up comedy audience, and it's a very touching tribute, and I kind of felt like, not that I was getting to know her, but because of the way that podcasts work and because I've been listening to him for so long, she even though I wasn't that familiar with her until recently, it maybe affected me more than it would have. Also, the fact that she was 54 and 54-year-olds shouldn't die. But I think that it got to me more than it would have because I knew her through him and a little bit through her work. And I'm also going to suggest some of her movies. The one that she made with him, centered around him, Sort of Trust, which he talked a lot about the process of making, and he did the music for, some of the music at least. Sort of Trust is available on Showtime Anytime, or there's a Hulu add-on, Showtime Hulu add-on. That's an interesting, very weird movie about a sword that uh, somehow proves that the South actually won the Civil War. Um, it's weird, but it's funny. And there's a movie on Netflix called Laggies, which has Keira Knightley and Chloe Grace Moretz, and I watched that. I was house sitting for my brother, and I just there was a series of Keira Knightley movies that I hadn't seen, and I really like Keira Knightley, and so that was one of them that I watched, and it's an interesting movie. Also on Netflix, at least his most recent stand-up special, End Times Fun, which she also directed, and anyone who's been watching Little Fires Everywhere, which I haven't yet because I we've been watching things in blocks, and we'll eventually get to Little Fires Everywhere and watch it all straight through. That's on Hulu also, and she's directed some episodes of that. Um, so that's your Lynn Shelton homework. Um, and of course, a lot of people have died. A lot of famous people have died, but that one I wanted to start with because again, it's probably bothering me more than your typical celebrity death would, for a variety of reasons, but mostly because I've been following Mark Maron's life for. It's kind of like the first time I wrote about his podcast for my blog. I think it was um, around the time that Philip Seymour Hoffman died, and just how he tied that into his own struggles with addiction and just the here's someone who died from an addiction, Philip Seymour Hoffman, and Mark Maron saying there are those of us who live with that. He died of it. There are people who live with that, and their addiction might be what ultimately kills them. But so there's in a constant state of being a survivor of their addiction. I think in Mark's case, I'm pretty sure it's alcohol but he was a comedian in the 80s and 90s, so there's probably aspects of everything. Um, and then around that time also, because of the way that I listen to them, sometimes I miss one for whatever reason, and then that gets stored up, and then I listen to it on a train. So I listened to the episode where the past episode from probably months ago at the time, where he um, proposed to his then significant other, and then right after that, I listened to the most recent one, and he talked about breaking up with her. Um, so, and I was very bothered by the idea that I didn't know, or that I'd just been so happy for him, and I'd been listening to things out of order, and therefore I didn't know um, that it was weird. Um, and so, but in this case, I it's a mix of the usual. Um, well, this person left a body of work behind, and now, in a grim way, I'm slightly more interested in exploring that body of work um, as a tribute. But also, I was going to get to it eventually, and I'd started to get to it. But also, that mixed in with I didn't really know this person, but I felt like I knew this person more than I know most people who die. So anyway, and it's something to be thinking about whenever, if you're on the fence about the people who say we have to sacrifice the old and weak, the people who were going to die of this virus, we have to sacrifice them to get the economy reopened because it's worth it to save the economy. I think it's worth it to sacrifice some parts of the economy to save some people. Um, but again, she didn't die of the virus. She was maybe going to die this past week regardless of the virus, and that's weird to think about. Death in those terms. But anyway, I'm going to get on to different things. I just wanted to mention that podcast. I don't usually recommend episodes of podcasts, but that's one to listen to. And I think it's going to be the only one this week. I said to my roommate, I wonder what he'll do this week, if he will have new episodes, and it looks like it's just going to be the one. So, to the books, there's no good transition, as he would say or he wouldn't say, he'd just do the transition to the next thing from the grim thing. And the next thing is kind of grim. My first Joyce Carol Oates novel, Foxfire: Confessions of a Girl Gang. Not to be confused with the Angelina Jolie movie, which is technically based on this book, but has so little to do with it that I had seen the Angelina Jolie movie before reading this book, and as I was reading this book, I had no idea that they were connected. It's a really great book. Joyce Carol Oates is one of those people who I've been aware of her name for as long as I've been going to Barnes & Nobles. She's got a lot of books, been writing for a long time, and I just, for two conflicting reasons, never investigated her. On the one hand, I thought, this is a person who's been writing for so long, she's probably dead, because she's probably that kind of author who's held in such high esteem because she wrote so long ago. She's not. I saw her at the Brooklyn Book Festival last year, and just sitting there signing. I didn't attend her event. I kind of wish I had now. But also, so there was that impression that I had of her name, and then the idea that her books were the equivalent of just, I don't like to say trashy novels because it feels like no novels should be insulted in that way. But I'll say it for this purpose. I thought that she was one of the authors of novels that I wouldn't be interested in reading. But then I saw her. She looked interesting, looked like an interesting person. Again, I didn't hear her speak. I just saw her there signing books, long line of people. And then I saw this book at one of the used book stands. And I thought, it's a sign. This will be my first Joyce Carol Oates book. And I kind of been ignoring or just not seeing the subtitle. I knew that Foxfire was the title of the book, but I would occasionally forget that too. But I never really gave much thought to the subtitle. It takes place in the 50s. It is about one of those 50s street tough gangs, but not the guys, not the Fonz, not the guys from Grease. It's girls, and it makes sense that if there's a guy thing, there would be a girl equivalent, but you don't see that in popular culture. The girl gangs of the 50s did not become cultural icons like the guys in the jeans, the white t-shirts, and the black leather jackets with their hair greased. That didn't happen, so that was a bit of a surprise for me. I'm interested in pursuing the subject now, and it's also an interesting book in this. It's one of the books that doesn't. It's the same reason why I said in a previous video and wrote in a previous blog post that stuff like Grammarly that sanitizes people's writing so that it all seems the same in a way that somebody somewhere decided was right, that I'll call trash. That idea and any program that does that. This is not written the way that Charles Dickens would write a book, or his acolytes, people who hold him up, or hold who wrote Ulysses, that guy. But that's one of the books. Actually, I haven't read it. I shouldn't comment on that. I've read Dickens, but the people who are descended from Dickens literarily, the Tolkiens, who there are rules of how words need to appear and how punctuation needs to appear, how dialogue and paragraphs need to be chopped up, and where the white space needs to be. This book doesn't follow those rules. And that's why it was so great. From the first page, I was on fire, so to speak, and needed to keep reading because it went deeper, not by not distancing itself, by being so high and mighty in a like literarily high and mighty. Um, and that the brief what's the Juno Diaz book that made such a splash, The Brief Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde, I think it's called. That was another one. It didn't adhere to the rules of writing, and it was more effective for for not doing that. Um, so yes, I am now a fan of Joyce Carol Oates. I look forward to exploring the books that she's written before now, and I think she's in her 80s. She's probably still got a few books. I look forward to what she does um, from here on out. And there's another movie from 2012 that's based on this. I don't know where it is. Supposedly, it is more faithful than the other one, the one with Angelina Jolie. I'd kind of like to see that again, um, just to see where it's different and what I might recognize. But I'm not that interested because I really liked the book, and I didn't have clear enough memories of the movie to at all identify it with the book. So there's that one. Uh, George Bernard Shaw, I was already a fan of, and I have several of his plays up there. I tend to keep his plays when I read them. I'm not going to keep this one. Uh, Nothing against it. It's a perfectly good play, um, but that's just it. It's perfectly good. It didn't. When I read Major Barbara, I was blown away. Um, I kept Pygmalion because it's related to one of the great musicals. Also very interesting. St. Joan I didn't read. I saw it on Broadway, and I kept the copy that I was going to read. That's one I need to give another look. This is just a straightforward kind of. Um, I it seems weird to call Shaw Shakespearean, but it just reminded me of one of those Shakespearean plays where they're wearing masks or they are otherwise mistaken identity. It is otherwise a mistaken identity situation. That's pretty much what the play is. It has a nice happy ending. It reminded me also of Downton Abbey, which we've been watching, and we've just got the movie left to watch. But there were the kind of snarky servant characters. There was the very rich upper class family, the somewhat outsider who, in one way or another, wants in or is just happens to get in for whatever reason. Um, and the war themes that just didn't speak to me at this particular moment. We are, I think, technically still at war in the Middle East, but I think it's all uh, just drowned. Whatever's happening there, awareness of it is drowned by the pandemic. Um, so I'd love to see it eventually, and I will reread it one day. But it's just I can't keep everything, and I've got enough George Bernard Shaw without this. Our Town. Uh, Probably the first play that I read, probably the first real play, like legit theater play, that I was exposed to at all. There were children's plays that I watched and participated in elementary school and middle school. We did musicals. We didn't do plays. This I think I read in seventh grade. We did the thing where we were in class. We each would read lines, and I think there was a little bit of acting out because English teachers tend also to be the ones who direct the plays, and so middle school English teachers don't necessarily get to, like I said, we did musicals. They didn't get to do plays. So in English class, we pretended we were doing the play, staged it a little bit, I think. It was either this or The Diary of Anne Frank. One was eighth grade, one was seventh grade. But those were the first two legit plays that I was introduced to, and I have a very distinct memory of it, and that's probably a sign. I have a very distinct memory of this from seventh grade, if it was seventh grade and not eighth grade. From middle school, I have a very distinct memory of this, and the lesson of uh, be careful about the desire to go back in time, to live again, to cling to the past, I think I even can picture how we did it because it's a very simple set, and so you can do it in an English classroom. It's just we have the people in the chairs, the graves, and you can have the character walking up to them and then talking to them about, but I want to go back. I want to see it again. I can. I have that ability. Why wouldn't I? You'll know why you wouldn't. Pick a day that doesn't mean much. A day that you remember enough to pick it, but it's not going. But it's not the best day of your life. And it kind of, for me, this time through, I've been one of the projects that I did early on, and I don't want to do it again, but I've been, at least for some time, but I've been printing out, I think I've mentioned this, printing out digital pictures that there are no physical copies of from year to year. I've done 2004 through 2006 at this point, and because I started getting, the computer that I'm recording this on is great for recording videos, not so great for storing things, and that's what we have to do now with the digital pictures. We don't have them printed out, we don't put them in books, we have them stored on our computers, and then and this computer can't handle that because it's a solid state or whatever that means. It can't store pictures from 2004 to now, especially because with digital pictures you take a lot more than you take film pictures. So I started going through and selecting about 100 pictures a year to print, and just, looking back at that time and wanting to be there, because having been there, having survived that, I know that I can. It is therefore easier. It would be easier to do that again than it is to do now, and not just because of the pandemic. And that kind of, ironically, well, didn't my pictures don't go quite back to when I read this because we still had the film cameras at that point, and those were the primary picture-taking things. But I think a lot of it, because people say, oh, I wouldn't go back to that, I wouldn't go back to that, and I think, well, I would. In retrospect, it was torture in whatever way at the time, but there was also the great parts. But at the same time, I don't really want to necessarily. It's just if I could, I wouldn't mind if I did, but I don't. I want to move forward. I did. I saw a long time ago, and I have it somewhere on VHS, taped it off PBS, the Paul Newman Broadway revival from when I was first getting into theater, first following Broadway. And I'll have to give that another watch. Now, he plays the stage manager. I'd love to play the stage manager one day, or any role. I'd love to just be in this play. It's a great play. I understand why it is taught in schools. It should be taught in schools. You need to teach early on the lesson of don't cling to the past. Teach it as far into what will eventually be, as early on in what will eventually be the person's past as possible. I hope it is still taught. The people teaching now are the people who learned about it with me, so probably it is. Now to the somewhat main event. I'm going to link to the Mark Maron thing that I mentioned earlier below, and I'm also going to link to my friend Clea's Instagram page. She's been doing videos of where she showcases in each video, or each about 10 minutes long, an Ethel Merman playbill. She is our Ethel Merman. She's the Ethel Merman of today, and made a great study of her, has a great collection of Ethel Merman things, and it's not just playbills that get showcased in the videos. And they're all great videos, very interesting, you learn a lot, much more detailed than what I'm going to do, which is my version of that, Michael Crawford playbills. Ethel Merman did many Broadway shows, and there are many playbills to go along. Michael Crawford did 3. And the only reason I'm doing this is because I read the play that is his first one, that he did, his Broadway debut, and I happen to have the playbill of that because I got it at two Broadway flea markets ago. But I also have the other 2 playbills. So I'm going to go in reverse order. This is Dance of the Vampires, and this is not the playbill. This is the one I saw Michael Crawford in, the Broadway show that I saw him in. This is not from when I saw him, and you can tell because it's not signed. Mine is signed, and I have a picture with him. Is a very interesting situation. I was one of the last people to get it signed, and my dad was there. He brought me to see the show, and I think it was Michael Crawford's handler said, "There's this kid over here. You want to get the kid?" And so he's sitting there signing. I said, "Can I get a picture?" And he says, "No, you just have to do it," because I was the last one. He'd been out there he just did the 3-hour vampire rock and roll show. He was tired, and I understood. My dad had already taken the picture, and he took the picture of him telling me to take the picture. So that's that story. My playbill also is not from opening night. And you may look at this, and if you know about opening night playbills, you say, that's not an opening night playbill. It doesn't have the shiny sticker. But here's the secret about opening night playbills. The sticker is put on by the house, at the theater, I think by the ushers. I'm not sure because when I worked as an usher at a Broadway theater, we didn't put the shiny sticker on the playbills. So the way that you can tell, and I actually had this conversation when I was, I don't know if it was when I bought this one, but I was trying to say, what's the difference? But it says this is also this playbill is cheaper than the one with the sticker, and I said that they should be the same because the one that's printed says opening night. That's the opening night playbill. It doesn't say opening night December 2002 on my Dance of the Vampires playbill from when I saw it, or playbills from after it opened. It just says that on the playbills that are handed out the night of. So don't be fooled. If you see a playbill that you want, it may not have the shiny sticker, but you can still check and see if it's an opening night playbill. This show, just a few cast members worthy of note. Mandy Gonzalez, who I also saw in Heights. A lot of people know her from In the Heights. Renee Auberjonois from Star Trek, and I haven't gotten to him yet. I've seen the original series and the first 2 episodes of The Next Generation, going slow, but I look forward to seeing him. He recently died, and people were posting all the Star Trek stuff. I found a video, I think it was just audio, but it was a YouTube video with just audio of him doing the Logic Patter song from Dance of the Vampires. And I got a picture with him too, and that one he actually posed with me. He had a beard comparable to the one that I currently have. Before Dance of the Vampires, obviously probably the only one that most people know that he did, if they even know it was him necessarily. This also is not my playbill. I have seen Phantom on Broadway twice. Neither time with Michael Crawford, and I saw it on tour, also not with Michael Crawford, but this one has Michael Crawford. This is from my friend Julie Gold, who gave me her playbill collection shortly after I moved to New York. She saw the show on July 4th, 1988. Michael Crawford was still in it, and he was advertising his album Songs from Stage and Screen from Tower Records. And I don't know who Patty Kohenur is. I've seen her name elsewhere, but I've never seen her in a thing. I don't know much about her. Steve Barton, the original Raoul, was still in the show, as was Michael Crawford. But I guess Patty Kohenur was the primary Christine, but there are always 2 Christines. And the Monday and Wednesday Christine was Dale Christian. And I do know who she is, which is to say I've seen her do her thing, not live, but in the Michael Crawford in concert video. She's the one who does the Christine parts when he sings the title song, The Phantom of the Opera, and when he sings All I Ask of You, which is the Raoul duet with Christine. Also, Steve Barton, original Raoul, also the original Count von Krolock in Dance of the Vampires. Perhaps he would have done it on Broadway. I don't know. He died before it opened on Broadway. But yes, that's a connection. I believe he also played the Phantom eventually, Steve Barton. But the main event is Michael Crawford's Broadway debut in, let me see if I can find the date in here. I can find the date in here. I think it was 1967. I just do a quick I know exactly where to go to find out when Michael Crawford was in something. 1961, 67. No, that went too far. Go back. Went all the way to 2001. 77, 67. Is I Won the War. Broadway debut in black comedy, 1967. And, okay, so now getting back so that I can see how I look while I'm doing this. By the way, just quickly before I do this, this is not related to black comedy. This is his most recent English musical. That's how his autograph looks. That's how it looks on my Dance of the Vampires playbill. This show, unfortunately, did not come to Broadway. Did not get a cast recording. I am still waiting. But black comedy. Now, the published play here, there's a play called The White Liars and Black Comedy. It was 2 plays that they performed, and in the playbill, the 2 plays are Black Comedy and White Lies. So, different. White Liars, White Lies. Basically the same play, but from what I read in the published script. But The White Liars is the updated version of it. So Michael Crawford was never in The White Liars, but he played the role of Tom in White Lies, and it's essentially the same character. Yes, Tom. And The White Liars, or The White Lies, is very interesting. This isn't one of those plays. Some physical books are predestined to either be kept or be left. I thought I was going to keep Arms and the Man, the George Bernard Shaw play, because it's George Bernard Shaw, but I was wrong. I was always going to keep this one, but it's very gratifying to know that it's actually really great. The White Liars is about a couple of friends who go see a psychic, and one of them wants to bribe the psychic to give a particular fortune to get his friend to do a particular thing, but there are more twists than that. And black comedy I haven't finished yet, but it's I knew the premise going in, or the basic stage premise, which is at the beginning the lights in the set, the lights as far as the characters are concerned are on, but the stage is dark. And then the lights go out, a fuse blows, the lights go out, and the stage becomes bright, but the characters can't see because as far as they're concerned, it's a blackout. And it's not a situation where you want to have a blackout, because the Michael Crawford character is trying to sell art. He's trying to sell his sculptures. And also, he's trying to impress his girlfriend's father by filling his apartment with antique furniture that belongs to somebody else who doesn't know that he borrowed the furniture. And obviously, it's a comedy. It's a very British comedy. And it's quite funny. I hope that it gets revived. I'd love to be in it at some point as the Michael Crawford role. This is Michael Crawford in 1967, quite young, to the extent that people know what he looks like. Well, they know him as the Phantom, so his face is half obscured by makeup and half obscured by a plastic mask. Actually, the monster makeup and the mask are on the same side of the face, so it's just very white makeup on the other side. It's the general shape of his face, and no exaggerations. But this was a very, and I got it, I think, at the Michael Crawford table. I got these two things. I've gotten various things. The Phantom Bear came from the Michael Crawford table, um, but I did not buy it. It was a present given to me by someone who did buy it. Um, and they've had a few more since, but mine has green eyes, so I think mine is special. I like the Michael Crawford table. I think not the year that I got this, but the year before that, and not at the Michael Crawford table, I got the cast recording for Billy, which is the only musical that he was in, other than the Go-Between here, that I have not heard the score from because the CD is very hard to find. I got the album, the record album. I still have not listened to it because I don't have a record player here. And I don't want to travel with it because it's a record and it'll break. But I have it, so eventually I will get a record player, and then I will finally hear the score of Billy, composed, by the way, by the guy who wrote the fanfare that launches every James Bond movie and appears throughout every James Bond movie. The ba-da ba-da da-da-da. That guy, he wrote a musical about a Michael Crawford character who uses balloons to fly. You never know. People do different artistic things in their artistic careers. So I think I'm going to leave it at that. The Michael Crawford Playbills. Still got a lot of books to read. Not going to run out of books. Still working on the guitar. Very, very happy that I'm going to keep this plate and reread it at some point and get further use out of it and not just have it sit there as a Michael Crawford artifact. I didn't get that at the Michael Crawford table. I got it at the used book sale. I rarely look through the plays. I was looking through Before Death Takes a Holiday, and I think I found that and Our Town at the same time. So library sales, I miss them. So you can check out the Lynn Shelton stuff. You can check out the Ethel Merman Playbill project. I will have links to blog posts that I've written over the past couple of weeks, including another, well, not Michael Crawford, but Andrew Lloyd Webber themed one from an early musical theater education video. That's not what it was, but that's what it was for me. Andrew Lloyd Webber's 50th birthday concert. He's been putting out his really useful group videos on YouTube every weekend to give people something to do to stay home and not go out. And I've seen Jesus Christ Superstar to death. I had just seen Phantom of the Opera on Broadway, so I didn't watch those. I can recite Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat in my sleep. I didn't watch that one. I don't care about Love Never Dies, so I didn't watch that one. I did watch Cats this past weekend. I watched By Jeeves the weekend before, and the first one that I actually watched the weekend before that was the 50th birthday concert because I hadn't seen it in a long time. I watched the clips sometimes, but not all of them. It's a lot that I hadn't seen in a while. It is detailed in that blog post. I'm really curious if he's going to continue because so far as I know, all the stuff that he has the rights to put on YouTube have been put on YouTube. Maybe he'll put the Madonna Antonio Banderas Evita, but I won't watch that because I have that on DVD and watched it earlier this year. So stay home and stay safe, but occasionally go outside and go for a walk. If things are open, it's your discretion, but just be careful with reopening things. And for lack of anything better to say, ram the blade ship.